Hello, I'm the Angry Spork. Remember I did this theme year before and I reviewed Gen13 crossing over with Generation X? You know what that story was missing? Besides coherency? I'm talking about Monster Madness and south of the border shenanigans. I'm taking issue with Gen X Gen13 Harvest of Evil, written by James Robinson with art by Salvador LaRocca, Tony Hubseal Milgram, and Shannon Blanchard. Let's see if this reunion between two teams of super teens makes us want to turn the page or turn our heads. The cover for this one is a wraparound, featuring the teams intermingled, some of them using their powers, and Roxy looking rather confused at Chamber, as if this is the first time she's seeing him without the wrapping around his face. In the background, we see John Lynch, as well as a castle that looks precariously perched on a cliff. I don't know if I should be expecting Frankenstein's monster or Bugs Bunny to come running out of there. Possibly both, if we're lucky. We begin with a splash page of the Gen X kids in casual wear, leaving an airport with loads of luggage, talking about how way cool and rad things are. It was 1997. They had to squeeze out every last use of the word rad before it completely lost its luster. On a 2-page spread overlooking the entire villa, Chamber warns them, with his voice and not telepathically, which is something of a snafu, not to throw around the Spanish so they don't offend the locals with stereotypes. Then he talks about how he'd heard federales shoot first and ask questions never, because that doesn't sound like a stereotype at all. Anyway, they've been allowed to go on this trip on their own because of a previous trip to LA and haven't done well on their exams, despite Jubilee's C average. Page and Monet then awkwardly exposit on La Casa del Sol, the resort they and students from other schools will be staying at, owned by a Mr. Pretorius. The others seem more interested in beachside recreation, though. They try hiring a taxi, Jubes opening with, "Excuse me, sir, could I please have a polar bear?" Because what's Mexican vacations without standard goofy mistranslation? When they mention the place they're headed, the driver speeds away alone. I know it looks ominous, but maybe the guy just changed his mind and decided to go get that polar bear Jubilee asked for. I do find it a little odd that the Spanish word is used within the brackets that are meant to translate the Spanish. Anyway, they try several more times with no luck, and skin is oddly miscolored here, until an old woman speaks up, and this time it's the English translation within the brackets. She offers to sell them her classic car for $100 American. Good thing Monet comes from a rich family. After a few hours driving, seemingly longer than they feel it should take, a sudden storm rolls in, and they stop on a splash page of an old castle, and aren't sure if that's the place they read about. There's only one kind of resort this place could be. The last resort. Suffocation, no breathing, don't give a f*** if I cut my arm bleeding. Most of them get outside the car to get a better look at the castle, either because they couldn't see through the windows very well, or they just like risking pneumonia. A flash of lightning makes it look as if there's someone on the side of the turrets, but the figure quickly vanishes. They decide to see if the owner can give them directions to the resort, but yeah, this is it, confirmed when they meet the castle's owner, Mr. Pretorius. Turns out the brochure mixed up the castles with the photos of a hotel down the coastline, so it's not quite as modern as they thought. He has his hunchbacked assistants, Nook and Cranny, help them to the East Wing, while mentioning that only one other school arrived because the rest of them couldn't get transportation, so went on home. They couldn't phone the castle because Pretorius likes his privacy too much to have a landline. The kids will meet the other guests from the West Wing in the morning, so they retire to their chambers for now. Later, while their experience isn't quite up to expectations, Sync takes a lot of dialogue to point out the West Wing is where they saw whatever it was outside, and wonders who the other students are. We jump back 4 hours, where the Gen13 team arrives under dustier conditions on a splash page. Most of them are rather disappointed with the castle, but Grunge is excited by how it reminds them of old movies, like one starring Vincent Price. That's when Pretorius appears, just as shadowed as his aides, practically predicted by Caitlin.
If this story gets any more meta, I'm gonna expect Deadpool to drop by any second. And besides, Bubble!
Inside, the group is heading towards the West Wing, passing by some classic decor like the standard painting with spy holes carved out of the eyes. The lights go out and there's talk of someone touching someone, and Grunge of course has to plead innocence. Bobby uses powers to give them light, a moment later than he should have, but is then knocked out by something too quick to be seen, which also kills his flame. As the storm outside begins, they get some illumination from the lightning, and technically the sound of the thunder should be during the blacked out images, but well, that's just me being nitpicky, I guess. This would hardly be the first story to have that inconsistency. One flash reveals an ape-like creature that attacks Caitlin, and her friends attempt to help. When Pretorius arrives, turning on the light, revealing the team dogpiled on each other, he explains the monster was a test subject in his amateur science experiments. It had gotten loose, but Nook and Cranny got him under control, so it's all good.
If you can't trust a guy that keeps dangerous lab animals as part of his hobby and doesn't have a phone to contact the outside world, who can you trust?
With the car arriving outside, Pretorius insists his first arrivals return to their quarters and wait to meet their fellow guests until morning. Sure enough, come breakfast time, the two groups meet again, as Pretorius finds out they've been previously acquainted, which is why they're comfortable enough to talk about movies, handbags, and why is Skin betting he'll eat a lizard?
You know, maybe it's been a while, and I just need to reread some of my Gen X comics, but I don't quite remember eating live animals over a bet being one of his character traits. Maybe he's just goofing around and he doesn't really mean it. Hopefully.
Later at the beach, the students are discussing how creepy they all feel the castle is, and, according to an again-speaking chamber, the hunchbacks as well, which feels extra hypocritical coming from a mutant that has to hide his face. There's also some lament of the lack of saucy eye candy of either sex. This, of course, said while they're being watched by Pretorius.
How dare they call my castle creepy? I'm going to continue watching them sunbathe, then clip locks of their hair while they sleep tonight. Then we'll see who's creepy.
Fairchild decides to head into town, joined by Rainmaker, Page, and Chamber, while the rest enjoy some water sports, except for Roxy and Everett, who've decided to explore the castle. They discuss the ape attack from the previous night and how it looked beastly but not quite an ape. Despite the overall creepiness, Freefall finds the resort interesting in a gothic sense, though Sync isn't entirely feeling it. No, me and Goth ain't had a lot of truck with each other.
I have no idea what he's talking about. I grew up in the 90s and I never heard anyone use the word truck in that context before. I only knew it as, a vehicle. But hey, that's me.
Though just as they're agreeing the place is still kinda cool, they're knocked out by one of the suits of armor. That's definitely going to affect the castle's rating on creepystays.com. While the nearby town prepares for the upcoming Day of the Dead celebration, Grunge is busy being a complete creep, tugging on Jubilee's swimsuit. And according to Burnout, he's being on his best behavior. Way to enable, dude. Someone emerges from the water behind Grunge. Not a vengeful teenage mutant, but a humanoid fish creature. They all attack in hopes of figuring out if it's a mutant or a guy in a suit trying to scare teenagers off the land for personal profit, but it knocks them back ashore and takes off. Maybe because they didn't have a talking Great Dane. Jeez, look at Skin's arms. Now they're colored differently than the rest of them. Come on, Shannon Blanchard, what's the deal? Between the man-ape attack last night and the man-fish just now, they decide to investigate Pretorius' lab for answers. And that just so happens to be where we go, with the amateur scientist berating his much more clearly drawn underlings for letting the aquatic creature loose. It only returned because of a control collar all the hybrids wear, not because they're pets. Thankfully, his assistants are kinda stupid and have forgotten the whole plot, so Pretorius explains it to them for the reader's benefit. By splicing human cells with animals, the resulting creatures have organs that can not only replace normal human anatomy more effectively, it somehow has the added effect of improving the general well-being of the recipient. This means that people with money to burn will spend it on these super organs and stay young and healthy. He even mentions the Queen Mother as one of his clients, and it's been quite lucrative, cutting up his science experiments and FedExing their pieces across the globe.
Apparently, shipping gene-spliced organs around the world is something Brown won't do for you.
However, the mad would-be doctor figures actual superhumans would make even better sources of super organs, and bribes some folks in the US government to learn about John Lynch's young charges, inviting them and several other non-powered schools to come to the resort. When the GEN13 kids vanished, it'd be considered a chance occurrence, but only one other school attended. The Xavier kids, he assumes, are powerless. The kids have overheard this through a sewer grate in the wall, I guess, also finding Sink and Roxy in a cage, and the latter of whom will be dissected in a short time, so Burnout will fly into town for help. M can fly, but I guess right now she's not that great at it, while the others stay behind to keep an eye on their captive friends. By the beach, Caitlin and the others have returned, having just missed the pyrokinetic, and are soon met by Skin, who they say is in uniform, but it just looks like his beach clothes, just with the X belt added.
Setting aside the coloring mistakes for the time being, why did Skin just suddenly show up? It seemed to me like the team was going to watch over their captive friends while Burnout went and got help. Did the dude just need to get some air and just happen to run into the others as they arrived?
Soon enough, everyone else is suited up on a splash page, crashing into the lab. It's neat, if a crowded scene, but they don't get to do anything before they're knocked out with either gas or tranq darts. They later wake up restrained, Pretorius gloating about having more superhumans than he thought. Oh, the profits to be had for your bits and pieces. I don't like to think about it.
What? You were thinking about it just now and earlier when you were expositing it to your hunchback henchman. You were clearly planning this for a while and never seemed hesitant about cutting these kids up, even the ones you didn't think had powers. I mean, unless this is a typo, saying you don't like thinking about it is just plain confusing.
After a humorous exchange where Professor Pretorius, at least that's what his goons are calling him, realizes one of the students is missing, he hits Grunge with some truth serum. It makes him pretty loopy, but he does reveal that Bobby went into town, so that's where the so-called prof is going with his hybrids, intending to let the locals think monsters of legends have descended upon their town during Dia de la Muerte celebrations, while he looks for Burned Out. His name is Burnout. It doesn't matter what he's called now. He'll be burned out when I'm done with him.
Even if this guy is a professor, he should take a few classes from the School of Snappy Dialogue, because that is just D- grade work right there. Shame on you!
I'll give the villain this much. He looks like he has been busy. Several more beasts than we've seen so far. A lizard, a bird, an ant, a rhino, but no warthog, rat, or turtles, so Pretorius is saved from a lawsuit at least. After the monster mash is gone, Nook and Cranny are left behind to guard the students, but are distracted by M long enough for Roxy to swing their cage to knock them out. She and Sink escape and are instantly in their fighting clothes in the next panel, as everyone heads out after Pretorius. After a splash page of showing festivities underway, Bobby has contacted John Lynch. Having explained the situation so far, including the local sheriff not understanding English, and Bobby knows Spanish, but understood the mention of Pretorius' name enough to throw the teenager out. Lynch tells him that he won't be there soon enough, so Burnout has to do whatever it takes, even throwing some fire around to force the sheriff's cooperation. Do it, jerk! Your friends are relying on you.
Why did you call him a jerk? That doesn't seem particularly accurate or productive at the moment. His friends are in danger, and even though he doesn't know it, he's got monsters on his tail. So maybe don't insult the guy. What is with the dialogue in this story all of a sudden?
With his mentor a few hours out, Bobby finds the sheriff conveniently nearby, and is about to scare up some aid when the bird hybrid attacks, but stays largely off-panel, which kind of feels awkward. As Pretorius controls the beast, musing about how he could use these creations to flat-out commit crimes, a canine beast joins the fight, as do other hybrids, though they don't show up very well. Fortunately, the cavalry arrives on the next splash page, both teams proceeding to attack the control collars, One humorously punched off a creature sent flying off panel. Pretorius attempts a retreat, maybe to the Cayman Islands to further develop his monstrous criminal empire, only to be stopped by M and Roxy. Meanwhile, his creatures escape into the desert.
If the Michael Bay Transformers movies have taught us anything, it's that you can let previously controlled or captive wild beasts roam free wherever they want, so long as you've stopped the main bad guy. I can't wait for the follow-up to this story where they're all taken in by Mark Wahlberg.
Both teams are relaxing in GEN13's base in La Jolla, California, where Sean Cassidy and Emma Frost feel their students can be safely watched over by John Lynch for the remainder of their vacation. They exposit that Pretorius was handed over to government officials to divulge his gene-splicing group, though that doesn't have the greatest implications. The Mexican authorities have not yet caught the hybrids, which will probably become part of their local mythology. The comic ends as Rainmaker believes she sees someone far off into the water, but it disappears. She attributes it to a trick of the light, but on the final splash page we see that isn't quite the case.
And that was Generation X Gen 13. Compared to its predecessor, it might not have quite as much action, but I did find it much more enjoyable.
The story felt like a campy, loving homage to old monster and horror movies, like the kind mentioned by Grunge earlier. Strange creatures, creepy castles, and a nefarious laboratory. Even some of the dialogue from Pretorius and his henchmen felt very much like it came from one of those films. It feels like a story not taking itself too seriously, and hits the right tone that certain errors don't drag it down too much.
The way to continually rag on people suffering from kyphosis. It's bad enough the Gen 13 girls kept calling Nook and Cranny creepy, but even Chamber joins in, and he's a mutant whose power blew his jaw off. And the world hates and fears him as it is, so you'd think he would understand what it's like to be judged by appearances alone.
I mean, did you notice how they didn't even seem to care whether or not Nook and Cranny were arrested for their crimes? The art was mostly fine, though a few details became indistinct here and there, and there were several coloring errors. Caitlin's hair, Skin's clothes, and Skin. The numerous splash pages were done well enough, but I think a couple of them verged on filler. That being said, I do feel this story was a bit better focused than the first one. I didn't feel terribly lost due to my unfamiliarity with Gen 13, even though I think some of them didn't really get to display their powers very well. And a few oddities aside, the dialogue was pretty well done. Though Grunge is still a freaking creep. A guy that had to profusely apologize to his girlfriend for a kiss he didn't initiate decides to tug at the bikini strings of a casual acquaintance. He is clearly not the brains of the outfit.
Overall, it's a solid enough story that doesn't cause any tremors, but its flaws didn't make me wish I was reading something else. This is an example of why it's sometimes a good idea for these publishers to take turns with these ideas of one-shot crossovers. If the first one falls flat, the second one can possibly do better. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.